I asked a woman at a gas station outside Saginaw, Michigan, whether this was a nice town. She had a kid in the back seat, 8 or 9 years old, headphones on, staring at the dashboard. She looked at me. She looked at her son. She looked back at me. And then her voice dropped to almost nothing. "Don't write that down," she said. "Don't quote me. Just leave before it gets dark." That was it. That was the whole tourism brochure. That was every Chamber of Commerce slogan, every welcome sign, every local news segment about a comeback that never came. All of it rolled into one sentence from a woman who pumped gas for a living and was too tired to lie. I am Report State. I have been walking through American towns for years. Not the postcard towns, not the ones with the jazz festivals and the artisan donut shops. The other ones. The ones where the locals will pull you aside and beg you, in a voice they reserve for warning their own children, to keep driving. You think America is one country. It is not. It is two. There is the country on the brochures, and there is the country in the gas station whispers. The brochure country has a main street and a craft brewery and a farmer's market on Saturdays. The whisper country has a main street too. Half of it is boarded up. The other half is pawn shops, payday lenders, and a family dollar with bars on the windows. Same country, different planet. Tonight I am taking you through 10 towns. 10 places where the people who actually live there are publicly, openly, repeatedly begging strangers not to come. Not in a polite way, not in a marketing way, in an actual way. On Reddit threads, in letters to the editor, in gas station whispers. In comment sections under their own town's tourism videos, saying, "Please, do not believe what you are seeing. Do not buy a house here. Do not bring your family." I went and I read every word of it. I pulled the FBI uniform crime reporting numbers for 2023. I pulled the Census Bureau population data going back to 2000. I pulled the local newspaper archives. I cross-referenced the Reddit threads against verified incidents. I am not going to repeat anonymous claims and call it journalism. Every town on this list has the receipts. And I am going to tell you something before we start. One of these towns has a local subreddit literally named after the act of leaving the town. Type the letter r/leave and then the town name. That is the URL. That is what the locals built for themselves. Another one of these towns has a real estate disclosure form, an actual paper document that some agents refuse to write a contract without, because they have been sued, because buyers were not warned. And the number one town on this list, the one that takes the crown, used to be the wealthiest medium-sized city in America. Used to be, until the company that built it walked away and left the keys in the ignition. If you have ever thought about a remote work relocation, if you have ever scrolled Zillow at midnight and seen a 4-bedroom for $50,000 and wondered why, if you have ever planned a road trip and let your GPS pick the route, this episode is the warning the tourism office will never give you. Subscribe. Subscribe so the algorithm does not silently drop you into one of these zip codes, thinking it is doing you a favor. Let's break it down. Number 10. Stockton, California. The bankruptcy that never ended. You think bankruptcy is a thing that happens once. A bad year, a reset. You file the paperwork, you take the hit, you rebuild. That is not what happened to Stockton. Stockton filed for Chapter 9 municipal bankruptcy in 2012. At the time, it was the largest city in American history to do so. The mayor cried at the press conference. The pension obligations were a black hole. The police force was hollowed out. And then the city emerged from bankruptcy in 2015, and the press said, "Look, a comeback. Look at this resilient city." Locals know better. The bankruptcy is not a chapter that closed. It is the structural condition the city is still living inside. Stockton is a city of around 320,000 people, sitting in the agricultural Central Valley, about 80 miles east of San Francisco. On paper, it is California. It is sun, it is the Delta, it is a port. It is cheap by California standards. Median home prices around $430,000. In a state where the median is closer to $800,000, that looks like an opportunity. Here is what the listings do not say. Stockton's violent crime rate has been chronically among the highest in California for 2 decades. The car theft rate has been ranked first or second in the nation more years than I can count. The school district has cycled through superintendents like a revolving door. The downtown, which the city has tried to revive with fresh planters and rebranded loft conversions, still empties out at 6 p.m. and stays empty until morning. There are blocks where the streetlights work and blocks where they do not. I read a Reddit thread where a guy moved from the Bay Area for the cheaper rent and lasted 9 months. 9 months. He wrote that he stopped letting his wife go to the grocery store after dark. He wrote that he found 3 catalytic converters sawed off 3 different cars on his block in one summer. He wrote that the cops told him, plainly, "Do not bother filing the report. We cannot do anything. File it for the insurance, and that is it." He moved back. He paid double the rent. He said it was the best decision he ever made. Picture this. You are driving south on Interstate 5, 4 in the afternoon, summer heat shimmering off the asphalt. You take the exit because the gas is cheaper here than anywhere within 100 miles. You pull into the lot. The pump is wrapped in a metal cage. The clerk is behind 2-inch glass. You pay first, then pump. There is a man in a hoodie pacing the corner of the lot. He is not looking at you. He is not looking at anyone. He is just pacing. The clerk sees you watching. He shrugs. That is Tuesday at 4 p.m. That is the postcard. The Stockton Chamber of Commerce will tell you about the comeback. They will tell you about the new restaurants on the Miracle Mile. They will tell you about the tech jobs. They are not lying. They are just leaving things out. The locals who stayed are not leaving things out. They are tired of pretending the brochure is the whole truth. And if you think Stockton is bad, the next town on the list lost almost 2% loss in 2 decades. That is the population of an entire neighborhood, an entire generation, packing up and driving away. Pine Bluff is in southeast Arkansas, about 45 minutes south of Little Rock. It used to be a paper mill town. It used to have a downtown with 5 movie theaters, department stores, hotels with brass-fitted lobbies. The Arkansas Democrat-Gazette has published archive photos of what Main Street looked like in 1965, next to what it looks like today, and you do not need a caption. The buildings are the same. The buildings are still standing. There is just nobody inside them. The FBI numbers are bad. Pine Bluff has consistently ranked in the top 3 or top 5 most violent cities in America per capita for the last decade. Per capita. That is the statistic that matters when a city is shrinking, because a stable number of crimes against a falling population is a rising rate. The homicide rate has at times been 10 to 15 times the national average. Read that sentence again. 10 to 15 times. Here is what the local quote sounds like. There is a man, an older black gentleman, who has been profiled multiple times by Arkansas reporters because he refuses to leave his porch on East 6th Avenue. Even after his neighborhood went from a working-class block to a vacant lot wasteland. He was asked in 2022 why he stays. He said, "Somebody has to remember it was here. Somebody has to be the witness." That is not a marketing line. That is grief. The Chamber of Commerce in Pine Bluff actually closed in 2022. That is not a metaphor. That is not me being clever. The actual organization, the actual official body whose job is to attract business and tell visitors how great the town is, dissolved. The membership had collapsed. Nobody was renewing dues. Nobody saw the point. A city without a Chamber of Commerce is a city that has stopped pretending. The cost of living in Pine Bluff is low. You can buy a 3-bedroom house for under $60,000. The listings make it look like a steal. They show interior photos. They do not show what is across the street. They do not show that the corner store closed in 2019 and never reopened. They do not show that the elementary school 3 blocks over has lost 40% of its enrollment since 2010. They do not show the boarded windows 2 doors down. Picture this. You are scrolling Zillow. You are exhausted by your $800,000 coastal market. You see a beautiful brick ranch with a magnolia tree in the yard for $55,000. You think, This is it. This is the move. You fly out for a weekend, you drive past at noon, and it looks fine, maybe a little quiet. You drive past at 8 p.m. The whole block is dark. Not power outage dark, vacant dark. There are no porch lights because there are no porches in use. The magnolia tree is the only thing that looks alive. A Reddit user from Pine Bluff once wrote, "Do not let the price fool you. The price is the warning. The price is the disclosure. If a 4-bedroom is $50,000, the 4-bedroom is not the deal. The 4-bedroom is the consolation prize for the life you are agreeing to live around it." That is the take. That is Pine Bluff in one sentence. The price is the warning. And if you think a town losing a third of its people is rough, the next pocket on this list is technically inside one of America's most famous cities. It is a suburb of Memphis. And the people who live in Memphis proper will tell you, with no hesitation, that this neighborhood is the one even Memphis has given up on. Number 8. Frayser, Memphis suburb, Tennessee. The suburb that Memphis disowned. I want to be very precise here. I am not putting Memphis on this list. Memphis, the city, has its problems and its glories, and is not the topic of this episode. Frayser is. Frayser is a neighborhood in the northern part of Memphis, technically inside the city limits, with its own zip code, its own school district feeder pattern, its own identity, and its own reputation. Frayser was annexed by Memphis in the 1950s. It was, for a long time, a working-class, predominantly white suburb built around the International Harvester plant. The plant closed in 1982. The white residents began leaving. By the early 2000s, Frayser had become predominantly black, predominantly poor, and almost completely cut off from the economic engine of Greater Memphis. The Commercial Appeal has been writing about Frayser as a separate problem from Memphis for at least 20 years. The crime statistics are the kind that make people stop quoting them. Shelby County Sheriff's data and Memphis Police Department incident reporting put parts of Frayser at violent crime rates that exceed the rates of entire mid-sized American cities on a per capita basis for census tracts that contain only a few thousand people. There are blocks where the violent crime rate is in the high triple digits per thousand residents. That is not a typo. Locals do not call it Frayser. They call it Frayskin sometimes, with a particular kind of dark humor. Memphis residents who live in Midtown or East Memphis will tell you, plainly, do not drive through Frayser if you do not have to. Do not stop for gas. If your GPS routes you that way, override it. The pizza chains stopped delivering to certain blocks years ago. The big grocery chains will not open stores there. There is a phrase locals use for the wider phenomenon. They call it food apartheid. The Memphis Commercial Appeal has used the phrase in print. Here is what is buried in the numbers. The median household income in parts of Frayser is under $25,000. That is less than half the Memphis median. The vacant housing rate is over 30% in some tracts. The school district's high school, Frayser High, has cycled through emergency state intervention multiple times. There is a documentary about a local football coach who tried to use the team as a way to keep boys alive long enough to graduate. The documentary won awards. The premise of the documentary, stated in its opening minutes, is that in Frayser, the question is not whether boys will go to college. The question is whether boys will reach age 18. Read that sentence twice. That is the framing. That is what people who actually live there put on camera, on the record, in a film with their names attached. Picture this. You are driving up Watkins Street at 3 in the afternoon. There is a corner store with a hand-lettered sign that says, "Cash only, no loitering." There are 3 men sitting on milk crates outside it. They are not loitering, technically, because they own the milk crates. The sidewalk is cracked and weed-choked. There is a vacant lot to your right where a house burned down in 2017 and was never cleared. There is a yellow bicycle, kid-sized, leaning against a chain-link fence, untouched, rusting, like it has been there for a year. Maybe it has. Memphis as a city has a tourism brochure. Memphis has Beale Street, Graceland, the Civil Rights Museum, world-class barbecue, a basketball team, and iconography. Frayser does not appear in the brochure. Frayser is what locals call the part you do not visit. And the people of Frayser themselves, on Reddit, on Nextdoor, in letters to the editor, are not asking you to visit either. They are asking you not to. They are asking the city government to do something. They are asking the state to intervene. They are not asking for tourists. They are asking for survival. If you think a forgotten neighborhood in a famous city is the worst we will see tonight, the next town actually had a moment in the national spotlight. Amazon was supposed to save it. There was a press conference. There was a ribbon cutting. The town is still on this list anyway. Coming up next. Number 7. Bessemer, Alabama. The town Amazon couldn't save. In 2020, Amazon opened a fulfillment center in Bessemer, Alabama. 5,000 jobs. The press release was glowing. The local news covered it like a second coming. Bessemer, a former steel town just southwest of Birmingham, was supposed to be the comeback story of the decade. A national company, a major investment, a working-class town getting its dignity back. Then came the union drive. The retail, wholesale, and department store union tried to organize the workers. The vote in 2021 failed. The vote was rerun in 2022. It failed again, contested. The story dragged on. Reporters from across the country flew into Bessemer. They wrote about the warehouse. They wrote about the working conditions. They almost never wrote about the city itself. Here is what they did not write. Bessemer's population peaked in 1960 at around 33,000. Today, it is approximately 25,000 and still falling. The downtown is a row of empty storefronts with the kind of beautiful early 20th century brickwork that real estate developers fantasize about. Except nobody is developing them because the surrounding neighborhood has been hollow for 30 years. The violent crime rate, per FBI data, has been chronically among the highest in Alabama, a state that itself ranks badly on national comparisons. I will tell you a story. There is a stretch of road in Bessemer that locals call the Corridor. It runs from the highway exit toward the older part of town. The Amazon warehouse is on one end, the historic downtown is on the other. In between, you have boarded houses, 2 abandoned schools, a strip mall where exactly 1 of the 11 units is occupied, a hand-painted sign on a telephone pole advertising a cash for gold operation that may or may not still exist, and a church that has been condemned by the city but not yet demolished. The Amazon trucks blow past it all at 50 miles per hour. They are not stopping. They are not invested in the corridor. They are using it. A woman who worked at the warehouse during the union drive was quoted in a national magazine. She said, "The job is the job, but the town is the town. And Amazon coming here did not change the town. The town stayed the town." That is a sentence I have not stopped thinking about. Amazon coming here did not change the town. The town stayed the town. The Bessemer Chamber of Commerce, in fairness, is still operating. They have a website. They have a Welcome to Bessemer page. They emphasize the steel heritage. They emphasize the proximity to Birmingham. They emphasize the new corporate investment. They do not emphasize that the city's median household income is around $32,000, well below the Alabama median, which is itself well below the national median. They do not emphasize that the school system has been under various forms of state oversight on and off for years. They do not emphasize that the homicide clearance rate, the percentage of murders that result in an arrest, has been below the national average for as long as anyone has been tracking it. The local subreddit for Bessemer is small. The Reddit threads about Bessemer are mostly on the Birmingham subreddit, where people from the larger metro area give advice to newcomers. The advice is consistent. If you are moving to the Birmingham area, you can live in Hoover, you can live in Vestavia Hills, you can live in Mountain Brook if you have the money, you can live in Homewood, you can live in dozens of suburbs. The advice never says, you can live in Bessemer. The advice says, you can work in Bessemer if you have to, but you should not live in Bessemer. That is what the locals are telling you. Work here, do not live here. The Amazon warehouse is a daily commute, not a community. The town is the town. And the town stayed the town. Picture this. You finish a 10-hour shift at the warehouse. It is 1 in the morning. You walk to your car in a parking lot the size of an aircraft carrier. The lights are bright. The lot is safe. You drive out of the lot. You merge onto the corridor. Within 4 minutes, you have left the bright, safe lot behind, and you are driving past the boarded houses and the condemned church and the hand-painted gold sign. Your headlights are the only headlights. You do not stop at the red light if there are no other cars. You learned that the first week. That is Bessemer. That is what Amazon could not save. And if you think a national corporation failing to save a town is the bottom of this list, the next town has the opposite problem. There is no national corporation. There is no fulfillment center. There is just a slow, chemical, drug corridor decay. And it is happening in a place that, on the surface, looks like postcard Middle America. Number 6. Springfield, Missouri pockets. The meth belt of the Ozarks. I want to be careful again. Springfield, Missouri, as a whole city, has a lot going for it. It is the third largest city in Missouri. It has Missouri State University. It has a growing healthcare sector. It has a downtown that, in patches, has been genuinely revived. I am not saying do not visit Springfield. I am saying there are pockets of Springfield and an entire surrounding rural geography that the locals will tell you plainly to avoid. And the reason is not generic urban crime. The reason is methamphetamine. The Ozarks region has been, for the last 25 years, one of the densest methamphetamine production and distribution corridors in the United States. Beth Macy, in her book Dope Sick, traces parts of the opioid epidemic through this region, but the meth story is older and in some ways uglier. Rural sheriffs in the counties surrounding Springfield have testified before Congress about labs, about super labs, about the shift from local production to imported product moving through the I-44 corridor. Springfield sits at a crossroads, and crossroads in the drug economy are where the wear and tear shows. In specific neighborhoods on the north side of Springfield and in adjacent unincorporated areas, the visible signs are unmistakable. Trailer parks where half the units are abandoned. Motel rows where the weekly rate is $300 and the parking lot at 3 in the morning has more activity than at 3 in the afternoon. Convenience stores where the cashier knows every regular by face and not by name. The local news. The Springfield News Leader has covered this for years. The crime statistics for Springfield as a whole are mixed. Some neighborhoods are perfectly safe. The university area is perfectly safe. The southern suburbs are perfectly safe. But certain pocket zip codes, when you pull the FBI data tract by tract, show violent crime and property crime rates 2 and 3 times the citywide average. And the citywide average is already higher than people from outside the region assume. Here is what locals tell newcomers. If you are moving to Springfield for a job at the hospital system, live south. If you are moving to Springfield for the university, live near the university. If you are scrolling Zillow and you see a 1950s ranch on the north side for $90,000 and you think, that is a bargain, go drive it at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday before you sign anything. Just drive it, see what is happening, see who is walking around, see whether the street lights work, see whether the houses next door look occupied. The houses look occupied does not mean they are. Squatting is real. Meth squatting is real. I read a thread on the Springfield subreddit where a guy who works in public health, who has lived in the city for 15 years, wrote a long post about why the meth problem is not the headline anymore. It is not the headline because the news has moved on to fentanyl. It is not the headline because the rural production has been disrupted by federal law enforcement. It is not the headline because the dramatic explosions of the home lab era are gone. But the user base is still here. The addiction is still here. The downstream effects, the broken families, the abandoned children, the property crime that funds the habit, are still here. The headlines moved. The reality did not. Picture this. You take a job at one of the big Springfield hospitals. You are excited. You buy a small house on the north side because it is what you can afford. The first month is fine. The second month, your neighbor's house has new occupants. 3 or 4 of them you cannot tell. They keep odd hours. The third month, your shed is broken into and your tools are gone. The fourth month, a power tool from your shed is for sale at a pawn shop on Kearney Street. The fifth month, you are on the Springfield subreddit asking strangers what to do. The strangers tell you what they always tell newcomers. Sell. Move south. Cut your losses. Take the equity hit. Get out. That is the meth belt. That is the pocket of Springfield the brochure does not show you. And the next town on this list is a place that should have been saved by a steel mill, just like Bessemer, except in this case, the steel mill is technically still there. The shell of it, and the town that depended on it is still trying to figure out what it is now. Number 5, Pueblo, Colorado. Steel town without steel. Pueblo, Colorado, population approximately 112,000. Located about 100 miles south of Denver on the Arkansas River in the high plains east of the Rocky Mountains. Pueblo has, on paper, a great location. It has affordable housing by Colorado standards, which is to say, expensive by national standards, but affordable by Front Range standards. It has Colorado State University Pueblo. It has the Colorado State Fair. It has historic adobe architecture, a Mexican-American cultural heritage that goes back centuries, and a downtown that, in good light, photographs beautifully. Pueblo also has a problem. The problem is that the city was built around the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company steel mill, which at its peak employed tens of thousands of workers and made Pueblo, in the early 20th century, one of the most important industrial cities in the American West. The mill is still there, in a much smaller form, owned now by a Russian-headquartered conglomerate called Evraz, employing a fraction of what it once did. The city around it never figured out a second act. Here is what Pueblo became: a regional hub for methamphetamine and, more recently, fentanyl, sitting on the Interstate 25 corridor between the New Mexico border and Denver. The Pueblo Chieftain, the local newspaper, has reported for years on the city's violent crime rate, which has chronically been among the worst in Colorado, a state where most cities are quite safe. Pueblo's homicide rate at times has exceeded Denver's on a per capita basis, despite Pueblo being a fraction of Denver's size. The locals know. The Reddit thread r/Pueblo is a long catalog of newcomers asking which neighborhoods are safe and locals answering with detailed maps. East Side, South Side, Downtown After Dark, Bessemer, which is, in a strange coincidence, also the name of a Pueblo neighborhood, named for the same steelmaking process. Belmont is largely fine. The northern suburbs are fine. The university area is fine. But the historic core, the part the brochures photograph, is not what the brochures suggest. There is a quote from a Pueblo resident, a longtime Chicano community organizer, that the chieftain published a few years ago. He said, "We have the heritage, we have the food, we have the culture. What we do not have is the safety. We had the safety when the mill ran 3 shifts. We do not have the safety now. We have the everything else. We do not have the safety." That sentence, like the Bessemer sentence, has not left me. We have the everything else. We do not have the safety. Pueblo is on a lot of relocation lists. The lists usually emphasize the affordability and the Colorado lifestyle, the proximity to mountains, the cost of living relative to Denver. The lists usually do not emphasize the FBI numbers. The lists usually do not link to the chieftain's homicide tracker. The lists are a marketing instrument. They are not a disclosure document. Picture this. You are in your 30s. You and your partner have been priced out of Denver. You are looking south. You see Pueblo on a best affordable cities listicle. You drive down for a weekend in June. The weather is perfect. You have a green chili burrito at a place on Union Avenue that has been there for 60 years. You walk by the river. You think, this is it. This is the move. We can buy a real house here. You go home. You start the paperwork. You move in October. The first cold night in November, you hear what sounds like fireworks at 2 in the morning. You check the neighborhood Facebook group. It is not fireworks. That is Pueblo. That is the steel town without steel. And if you think a western mid-sized city with a drug corridor problem is the bottom, the next town is in a state most Americans cannot find on a map quickly. In a city that has a full-blown public health emergency about its violent crime rate, and Air Balloon Festival, for the Sandia Mountains glowing pink at sunset, for green chili, for the Pueblo cultural heritage, for being a strange and beautiful and singular place that draws artists, retirees, and federal scientists from Sandia National Laboratories. Albuquerque is also the most dangerous large city in the American West by several measures for several years running. The Albuquerque Journal has reported, repeatedly, on homicide rates that have set city records year after year. In 2022, the city recorded a record number of homicides. In 2023, it broke that record. The Albuquerque Police Department has acknowledged, in public statements, that the homicide clearance rate, the percentage of murders that result in an arrest, has been below 50% for years, in some years closer to 30%. That means more than half of murders in Albuquerque, in the worst years, do not result in a charge. The locals know which neighborhoods. The International District, formerly known as the War Zone, a name so blunt the city tried to rebrand it and the locals kept calling it the War Zone anyway. The South Valley in pockets, parts of the West Mesa, specific motel corridors along Central Avenue, which is the old Route 66 alignment running east-west across the city. The motels are a particular phenomenon, weekly rate motels, residential occupancy motels, where the line between motel and homeless shelter and drug market has effectively dissolved. The Albuquerque Journal has published photo essays that you should look up if you want to understand what I am describing. Words do not do it. The kicker is this: the brochures for Albuquerque are stunning. The marketing is real. The Sandia view is real. The hot air balloons are real. The green chili is real. The cultural heritage is real. None of that is a lie. The lie, if there is one, is the lie of omission. The lie is what the brochure leaves out, and what it leaves out is the war zone. A Reddit user from Albuquerque wrote a post that went semi-viral within the New Mexico subreddits. The post was titled, roughly, "My honest review of moving to Albuquerque after 3 years." The user said, "The views were everything advertised. The food was everything advertised. The cost of living was reasonable. The job market was decent." And then the user said, "But we got our car broken into 4 times. We had a man pull a knife on my wife at a gas station. Our neighbor was shot in his driveway. And we are leaving." The user said, "The city is beautiful, and the city is broken, and we cannot do both anymore." Picture this. You are standing on the back patio of a friend's house in the Northeast Heights, the affluent part of Albuquerque, at sunset. The Sandia Mountains are pink, that particular pink they get for about 20 minutes a day. The air is cool and dry. You can hear a hot air balloon's burner faintly in the distance. A friend hands you a margarita. You think, "My God, this is paradise. Why doesn't everyone live here?" And then your friend, casual, says, "Just so you know, I do not drive south of Lomas after dark." And the second margarita does not taste quite the same. That is Albuquerque. That is the war zone with a Sandia view. And the next town on this list is so far north, so cold, so isolated, that most Americans never think about it. They picture the wilderness, they picture the salmon, they do not picture the neighborhood. The neighborhood that, by some measures, has had violent crime rates rivaling any in the contiguous United States. Coming up next. Number 3. Anchorage Mountain View, Alaska. Frozen and forgotten. Anchorage, Alaska, the state's largest city, population around 290,000, almost half of the entire state's population. Most of the imagery you have seen of Alaska, the aurora borealis, the moose in suburban driveways, the salmon fishing platforms, the dog sledding, applies to Anchorage in some form. Anchorage is not a wilderness. Anchorage is a real city, with a real economy, with real neighborhoods, with real problems. One of those neighborhoods is called Mountain View. Mountain View sits in the northern part of Anchorage, between the Glen Highway and the inlet. It is, demographically, the most diverse zip code in Alaska, with significant Pacific Islander, Alaska Native, African American, Hmong, and Filipino populations. It has been, for at least 2 decades, the neighborhood with the highest violent crime rate in Anchorage, by a substantial margin. The Anchorage Daily News has reported on Mountain View extensively. There was a period in the late 2000s and early 2020s when Anchorage as a whole was setting state homicide records, and Mountain View was the disproportionate driver of those records. Anchorage's homicide rate, in some years, has exceeded the rate of cities double its size in the lower 48. The Anchorage Police Department has publicly acknowledged staffing shortages, response time problems, and clearance rate problems. The Alaska context makes this worse, not better. In Alaska, you cannot just leave. You cannot drive to the next town if your town goes bad. The next town might be 100 miles away with no road in winter. The cost of living is high. Everything is shipped in. Heating is expensive. Housing options are constrained by geography and by climate. The resilient Alaska narrative, the one in the brochures, the one about hardy, self-sufficient frontier people, is true for some Alaskans, and it is also a way of explaining away problems that, in any other state, would be a national scandal. A woman who lived in Mountain View for 10 years was profiled by the Daily News. She said something I will quote roughly. She said, "In the lower 48, you can move out, you can move on, you can get to the next town. Up here, you live with what you have, and what we have is not enough." That phrase, "what we have is not enough," applies to police, to schools, to social services, to sanitation, to streetlights, to the basic infrastructure of what makes a neighborhood feel like a neighborhood instead of a holding pattern. Picture this. It is February. It is 4 in the afternoon. The sun has been gone for 2 hours. It will be gone for 14 more. There is hard-packed snow on the ground that will not melt until April. You are walking the 4 blocks from a bus stop to your apartment in Mountain View. The streetlights work. The ones that work. The cold is at 0 Fahrenheit. The wind chill is -20. You hear a vehicle behind you slowing down. You do not turn around. You walk faster. You reach your door. You lock 3 locks. You do not take your coat off for 10 minutes. You sit on your couch in your coat. You think, "This is my city." That is Mountain View. That is the frozen and forgotten neighborhood of Anchorage. And we are now down to the top 2. 2 towns, 2 stories. The next one is in the Rust Belt, in a state most people drive through without stopping, in a city that used to manufacture the machines that built America, and now manufactures, mostly, regret. Number 2, coming up next. Number 2, Rockford, Illinois, where the forge went cold. Rockford, Illinois, population approximately 145,000, located about 90 miles northwest of Chicago on the Rock River. Rockford was, for most of the 20th century, one of the great machine tool manufacturing centers in the United States. Furniture, fasteners, screws, machine tools, aerospace components. The kind of stuff you do not think about until it is no longer made in your country. Rockford made it. Rockford does not make it anymore, mostly. The decline has been documented in countless books about the deindustrialization of the American Midwest. The Rockford Register-Star has covered, year by year, the closures, the layoffs, the consolidations, the relocations to right-to-work states, or to Mexico, or to overseas. The result, by the early 21st century, was a city with a declining population, a hollowing-out tax base, a public school district under chronic financial stress, and a violent crime rate that, by FBI per capita measures, has at times ranked Rockford as one of the most dangerous mid-sized cities in America. The city government has tried. There have been downtown revitalization projects. There has been a riverfront redevelopment. There has been an aerospace cluster trying to grow on the back of remaining advanced manufacturing employers. There has been a mayor or two with a credible reform agenda. There has been investment. But the underlying problem, which is the loss of the high-wage manufacturing base, has not been replaced. The replacement jobs, where they exist, are warehouse jobs, healthcare jobs, retail jobs, none of them paying what the machine tool jobs paid. Locals have a phrase. They call it the Rockford discount. It refers to the housing prices. You can buy, in Rockford, a beautiful early 20th century craftsman bungalow with original woodwork, leaded glass, hardwood floors, a full basement for under $120,000. In the Chicago suburbs, the same house is $600,000. The Rockford discount is real. And the Rockford discount is the warning. Just like the Pine Bluff price. Reddit threads on r/Rockford repeat the same conversation over and over. Newcomer asks, "Is it really that bad?" Locals respond, "Some neighborhoods are great. Some neighborhoods are not. Here is the map. Here is the school district information. Here is what to expect." The locals are not cruel about it. They are not trying to chase people away. They are trying to manage expectations. They are trying to make sure the new people understand what they are buying. The neighborhoods on the west side of the river have a different reality than the neighborhoods on the east side. The city has been segregated, economically and racially, for generations. The disinvestment is not random. It maps onto the segregation. A man who runs a small machine shop in Rockford, second-generation owner, was quoted in a regional business publication. He said, "My dad made $50,000 a year in one head." He said, "My dad made $50,000 a year in 1978, running a Bridgeport mill in this town. 50,000 1978. That is over $200,000 in today's money for running a machine with a high school diploma. He bought a house, put 3 kids through school, took a vacation every summer, and retired on a pension. My guys today, doing harder work on more sophisticated equipment, make $22 an hour with no pension and a deductible that eats their teeth. That is the difference. That is what Rockford lost. We did not lose the work, we lost the wage." Picture this. You are walking through downtown Rockford on a Saturday afternoon in October. The leaves are turning. The Rock River is running high. The riverfront has been redone and it looks nice, genuinely nice. You walk past a brewery that opened in 2019. You walk past a coffee shop. You walk past 3 blocks of beautiful brick buildings that are exactly half occupied. The other half have "For Lease" signs that have been in the windows since 2017. You walk past a furniture store that closed in 2003, and the sign still says "Grand Opening." You think, this could have been Pittsburgh. This could have been Greenville. This could have been any of the comeback Rust Belt cities. Why isn't it? The answer is a long answer. It involves race, it involves geography, it involves which highways the federal government built, it involves which corporations made which decisions in which boardrooms in 1981 and 1989 and 2002. The short answer is, Rockford did not get the lucky break that other cities got. The forge went cold, and no one came to relight it. That is Rockford. That is where the forge went cold, and we are now down to the #1 town on this list. The town the gas station woman whispered about. The town that, by every measure I have, is the most complete failure of the American economic promise in a single mid-sized city. The town that General Motors built and General Motors buried. Coming up next, stay with me. This is the one, #1, Saginaw, Michigan, the town General Motors buried. Saginaw, Michigan. Let me give you the numbers first, because the numbers tell the story before any of my words do. In 1960, the city of Saginaw had a population of just over 98,000 people. Today, the city of Saginaw, according to the most recent Census Bureau estimates, has a population of approximately 42,000 people. That is a loss of more than 56,000 people. That is a loss of more than 57% of the entire population of the city in roughly 6 decades. There are entire neighborhoods, entire grids of streets where every other house is gone. Not boarded up, gone, demolished, returned to lot. The grass grows. The street light on the corner still works. Nobody lives on the block. Saginaw is in central Michigan, about an hour and 40 minutes north of Detroit on the Saginaw River. Saginaw was, for most of the 20th century, a General Motors town. GM had multiple plants here. GM employed, at the peak, more than 25,000 workers in Saginaw alone. GM built the houses, indirectly. GM built the schools, indirectly. GM built the parks, the bowling alleys, the bars, the union halls, the funeral homes, the way of life. When GM was here, Saginaw had one of the highest median household incomes in the entire United States for cities of its size. The 1960s, Saginaw, Michigan, one of the highest median household incomes in the country. Look it up. Then GM left, not all at once, slowly, plant by plant, decade by decade. The Saginaw Steering Gear Plant, the Malleable Iron Plant, the Gray Iron Foundry. Each closure was a press release. Each closure was a few hundred or a few thousand jobs. Each closure was a wave of families packing up or staying and getting poorer. By the time the last major GM operations were spun off, sold, or shuttered in the 2000s and 2010s, Saginaw was no longer a General Motors town. Saginaw was the bones of a General Motors town with the body removed. The FBI numbers for Saginaw are some of the worst per capita in the United States, year after year, for a city of its size. The homicide rate has, in some years, ranked Saginaw in the top 5 most violent cities in America. Top 5. In a country of more than 330 million people, in a city of 42,000. The Saginaw News and the local television stations have covered year after year the same kind of stories. A teenager shot on a porch. A grandmother shot in a drive-by intended for someone else. A toddler caught in a crossfire. The names change, the headlines do not. Charlie LaDuff, in his book Detroit, An American Autopsy, wrote about Saginaw as a kind of warning shot for what would happen to Detroit. Saginaw got there first. Saginaw was the canary in the coal mine. The Detroit story became famous because Detroit is famous. The Saginaw story is the same story, told earlier and quieter, in a smaller city, with less national attention, with the same outcome. Charlie LaDuff understood this. He wrote about the demolitions, about the greenfield reclamation, about the city government literally tearing down its own neighborhoods because there was no economic case for keeping them standing. Demolition as policy. Demolition as the official strategy of municipal government. That is Saginaw. That is what GM left behind. The local subreddit, r/Saginaw, is a masterclass in the gap between brochure and reality. You will find posts from newcomers asking which neighborhoods are safe. You will find posts from longtime residents listing, by street name, the boundaries you do not cross. North Side, East Side, Buena Vista Township, which is a separate municipality, but functionally part of the Saginaw urban experience. The locals are clinical about it. They sound like men giving directions in a war zone. They are not exaggerating. They are reading you the map. Here is the gas station woman. Here is the woman from the very start of this video. The one who told me, "Don't write that down, just leave before it gets dark." She was in her 50s. She was black. She had been pumping gas for $6 an hour for 12 years at the same station on the east side of Saginaw. Her son, in the back seat, was 9. He was wearing headphones. He was watching something on a phone with a cracked screen. She told me she had lived in Saginaw her entire life. Her grandfather had worked at GM. Her father had worked at GM. Her older brother had worked at the foundry until it closed. None of them had pensions, in the end, because of how the spin-offs and the bankruptcies and the asset transfers had been structured. The pension promises got written down to nothing in court documents she did not understand and could not afford a lawyer to fight. She told me she stayed because her mother was buried here and her son was in school here, and moving costs money she did not have. She told me she did not let her son walk to school. She drove him 6 blocks. She drove him because 2 years earlier, a kid he knew had been shot at the bus stop. Not killed, wounded. That detail mattered to her. Wounded, not killed, was a kind of grace in her telling. The kid lived. The kid was in a wheelchair now, but the kid lived. That was the threshold she was tracking. Wounded, not killed. She told me, when I asked, that she did not blame GM. She did not blame the union. She did not blame any single politician. She told me, and I am going to quote this as closely as I can remember it. She said, "Somebody decided this town was not worth keeping. Somebody in a building somewhere decided we were not worth the math. And then they did the math. And then they left. That is what happened to us. The math left. The math left." That is the sentence. That is Saginaw in 3 words. The math left. Picture this. You are driving down Genesee Avenue in Saginaw at dusk in October. The light is failing. There is a vacant lot to your right that in 1965 was a row of 7 houses. There is a vacant lot to your left that in 1965 was a corner store and a barber shop. There is a single house ahead, the only structure on the block, with a porch light on. There is an American flag on the porch. There is a man on the porch in a flannel shirt. He is in his 70s. He has lived in that house for 51 years. He is one of 3 remaining residents on a 4-block stretch. The city has offered, twice, to buy his house and demolish it as part of a green reclamation program. He has refused, twice. He told a reporter once, "This is my house. This is where I raised my kids. This is where my wife died. You can demolish it when I am dead, and not before." He is on the porch. The flag is moving slightly in the wind. The street light at the corner buzzes on. You drive past. You do not stop. You leave before it gets dark. That is Saginaw. That is the town General Motors built and General Motors buried. That is the #1 town on this list. That is the gas station whisper. That is the math that left. And here is what I want you to take away from this entire episode. Every town on this list, all 10 of them, has the same underlying story. A company left, or an industry left, or a tax base left, or a generation left, or a marketing department put a glossy filter over the parts that did not leave and called it a comeback. The locals know. The locals always know. The locals are, by definition, the ones who stayed. They watched it happen. They are not bitter people mostly. They are tired people. They are people who would like the brochure to match the street. They are people who would like the disclosure form to be honest. They are people who, when a stranger asks at a gas station whether this is a nice town, are too tired to lie to you and just tell you, in a whisper, with their kid in the back seat, to leave before it gets dark. If you came to this video for shock value, I hope you got it. If you came for relocation research, I hope you got it. If you came because you have ever felt the gap between what your country says about itself and what your country actually is, I hope you got it. The gap is real. The gap is on the map. The gap has zip codes. Subscribe to Report State. The next episode is not about crime. The next episode is about a different kind of warning. The kind that does not show up in FBI data because it is not a crime exactly. It is something quieter. It is something that 10 different American towns are dealing with right now, and that nobody in the national press has connected the dots on yet. I have. The dots make a shape. The shape is ugly. Episode 12. I will see you there. Until then, drive safe. Read the price like it is the warning. And when somebody in a gas station tells you to leave before it gets dark, you leave before it gets dark. This is Report State. Out.